My name is Beverly, and I'm 25 years old. Last Tuesday morning, I was sipping my coffee in my little Denver apartment when someone knocked on my door. I opened it to find a process server handing me legal papers. My own father was suing me for $25,000 in so-called family debts. I stared at those papers, feeling like my world had just flipped upside down. Harold, my dad, claimed I owed him money for everything from food and housing to college tuition he allegedly covered. The worst part? He was demanding immediate payment with interest, threatening to garnish my wages if I didn't comply. But what happened next in that courtroom would expose a web of lies that went deeper than I ever imagined. Before we dive into this story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, you won't believe what the IRS discovered about my family. Growing up in the suburbs of Denver, I always knew my family was different. My father, Harold, 52 years old, ran our household like a military operation. Every penny was accounted for, every expense questioned, and every financial decision had to go through him first. My mother, Doris, 48, seemed to live in his shadow, rarely speaking up about money matters or family decisions. My older brother, Stanley, 28, still lived at home despite being out of college for 6 years. While I was expected to contribute to household expenses from my part-time job at 16, Stanley never held a steady job for more than a few months. He spent most of his time in the basement playing video games, occasionally doing odd jobs that never seemed to last. The double standard was glaring. When I turned 18, Harold presented me with a detailed breakdown of what my room and board would cost. $250 a month, he said, plus $50 for utilities and internet usage. I worked at a local coffee shop after school, and on weekends dutifully handing over $300 every month. Stanley, meanwhile, contributed nothing. When I questioned this obvious favoritism, Harold would get defensive, claiming Stanley was going through a rough patch and needed family support. The rough patch lasted 6 years and counting. I remember one particular dinner when I was 21, working full-time at a marketing firm while finishing my business degree at night. Harold announced that rent was going up to $400 a month because I was now a college graduate with better earning potential. When I suggested Stanley should also contribute since he was older and supposedly job hunting, Harold slammed his fist on the table. "Stanley has special circumstances," he barked. "You're doing well for yourself. Family helps family." That phrase became his go-to response whenever I questioned the unfairness. Family helps family, but apparently the help only flowed in one direction. The breaking point came when I was 22. I had saved up enough money to move into my own apartment, a modest one-bedroom place about 20 minutes from my job. When I announced my plans to move out, Harold went ballistic. "After everything we've done for you," he shouted, "this is how you repay us. Moving out like we're strangers." Doris, as usual, remained silent, occasionally nodding when Harold looked her way for support. Stanley smirked from his usual spot on the couch, clearly enjoying the drama that didn't involve him for once. I moved out anyway, despite the guilt trips and emotional manipulation. Harold barely spoke to me for months, only calling when he needed something or wanted to criticize my life choices. Things got particularly tense about 6 months ago when Stanley asked me to loan him $5,000 for a used car. He claimed he needed reliable transportation to look for work, but I suspected it was for something else entirely. I had seen him with expensive electronics that appeared overnight, heard whispered phone conversations about payments and deadlines. When I refused the loan, explaining that I was trying to build my own financial security, the family turned cold. Harold called me selfish and ungrateful. Doris sent passive-aggressive text messages about family loyalty. Stanley spread rumors among our extended family that I had become too good for them since moving out. But what really bothered me were Harold's increasingly frequent questions about my income and savings. He would call under the pretense of checking in, then steer the conversation toward my job, my salary, my bank account balance. When I deflected these questions, he would get irritated and accuse me of being secretive with family. "I raised you," he would say. I have a right to know how you're doing financially. The last normal conversation we had was 3 weeks before I received those court papers. Harold called on a Sunday evening unusually chatty and friendly. He asked about my work, complimented my independence, even apologized for being hard on me over the years. It felt like progress, like maybe we could rebuild our relationship on healthier terms. Looking back now, I realized that call was him gathering information, calculating how much he thought he could extract from me. The warmth in his voice, the sudden interest in my well-being, it was all part of a plan that was already in motion. The knock on my door came at 8:30 on a Tuesday morning. I had just finished my first cup of coffee and was getting ready for work when I heard the firm official-sounding rap on my apartment door. Through the peephole, I could see a woman in a business suit holding a manila envelope. "Beverly Morrison," she asked when I opened the door. "Yes, that's me." "You've been served." She handed me the envelope and walked away before I could ask any questions. Inside was a civil lawsuit filed in Denver County Court. The plaintiff was Harold Morrison, my father. The defendant was me. The amount being sought was $25,000 plus court costs and attorney fees. I had to read it 3 times before the words sank in. Harold was suing me for what he called outstanding family debts incurred between my 18th and 22nd birthdays. The itemized list was staggering. Room and board for 4 years at $300 per month, $14,400. But wait, I had paid that money every month. I had the canceled checks to prove it. College tuition assistance, $7,500. This was news to me. I had paid my own tuition through student loans grants and my part-time job income. Food and miscellaneous expenses, $2,000. Again, completely fabricated. Interest on unpaid balances at 2% per month compounded $1,100. The total came to exactly $25,000. The papers stated that despite repeated requests for payment, I had refused to honor my family obligations and that legal action was necessary to recover these legitimate debts. My hands were shaking as I dialed Harold's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and businesslike. "I see you got the papers," he said before I could speak. "Dad, what is this? What are you talking about? I paid you every month when I lived at home." "You paid partial rent," he corrected. "The full cost of supporting you was much higher. I kept detailed records. You owe this money, Beverly, and it's time to pay up." "But the college tuition, I never asked you for tuition money. I have student loans for that." "I co-signed those loans. That makes me responsible. I'm calling in the debt." I could hear the coldness in his voice, the complete lack of fatherly warmth or concern. This wasn't the man who had raised me, or maybe it was, and I had just been too naive to see it clearly. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Because family helps family, and you've shown you're not willing to help. Maybe a court order will change your mind." The line went dead. I immediately called Doris, hoping she could explain what was happening, maybe even intervene on my behalf. "Your father knows best about these things," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe you should just pay what you owe and move on." "Mom, I don't owe this money. I paid rent every month. I have proof." "I can't get involved in this, Beverly. You need to work it out with your father." She hung up too, leaving me sitting on my couch staring at legal papers that accused me of being a deadbeat who refused to pay legitimate debts to my own family. I called in sick to work and spent the day researching family law attorneys. Most of the lawyers I spoke with seemed puzzled by the case. Family debt collection lawsuits were unusual, they said, especially when the claimed debts were for basic living expenses that adult children typically aren't legally required to repay. One attorney, Janet Fletcher, agreed to meet with me that afternoon. She reviewed the papers carefully, asking detailed questions about my living situation, my payments to Harold, and the family dynamics. "This is highly unusual," she said. "Parents can't typically sue adult children for retroactive room and board, especially if there was no written agreement establishing these as loans rather than family support. Do you have any documentation of your payments? I did. Bank records showing monthly transfers to Harold's account. Canceled checks from when I first started paying. Even text messages confirming the amounts. Bring me everything you have, Janet said. We need to build a defense file. But I have to ask, do you have any idea why your father might be doing this now? Has anything changed in his financial situation? That question stuck with me as I drove home. Why now? Why this amount? Why the sudden shift from distant disapproval to outright legal warfare? I decided to do some investigating of my own. A quick search of public records revealed something interesting. The house where I grew up, where Harold and Doris still lived with Stanley, had been refinanced twice in the past 2 years. Property tax records showed they were behind on payments. Harold was in financial trouble, and apparently he had decided that I was his solution. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective investigating my own family. What I discovered was more disturbing than I had imagined possible. First, I gathered every piece of financial documentation I could find related to my time living at home. Bank statements canceled checks, even deposit slips from when I would give Harold cash for household expenses. The evidence was clear. I had paid him every month exactly as agreed. But then I started digging deeper into Harold's claims about college tuition. I pulled my student aid records, loan documents, and payment histories. Not only had Harold never paid a penny of my tuition, but he had actively discouraged me from applying for certain scholarships, claiming they weren't worth the paperwork. I remembered now how proud he used to be about not having to pay for my education. Beverly's got it all figured out, he would tell neighbors and relatives. Scholarships and loans. Didn't cost me a dime to get her through college. So why was he now claiming he had contributed $7,500? My investigation took a disturbing turn when I decided to call Stanley. Despite our strained relationship, I hoped he might have some insight into Harold's sudden financial aggression. "Oh, that," Stanley said when I brought up the lawsuit. "Yeah, Dad's been talking about that for months. Said you've been living it up in your fancy apartment while the family struggles." "Fancy apartment, Stanley? I live in a converted studio." "And what do you mean he's been talking about it for months?" "He's got it all figured out. Says you owe way more than you think, and it's time you paid your fair share." The casual way Stanley discussed it chilled me. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision born from desperation. This was a calculated plan that had been developing for months. "Stanley, is the family really in financial trouble?" There was a long pause. "Dad says we're fine. Says once you pay what you owe, everything will be back to normal." After I hung up, I did more digging into public records. What I found painted a picture of a family in serious financial distress. Harold's auto repair business, which he ran out of the garage behind the house, had multiple liens against it. The mortgage had been in default twice in the past year. Property taxes were 6 months behind. But there was something else, something that made my stomach turn. I found records of Harold operating under multiple business names, some of which were registered to addresses that didn't exist. There were incorporation documents for companies that seemed to have no actual business purpose. I brought all of this information to Janet, my attorney. She spread the documents across her conference table, studying them with growing concern. "Beverly, this isn't just about the money he's demanding from you," she said. "Your father appears to be running some kind of shell game with his business finances. These multiple entities, the Phantom addresses this, suggests he might be hiding income or assets." "What do you mean?" "I mean your father might have bigger problems than just being behind on his mortgage. If he's been operating unlicensed businesses or failing to report income, he could be in trouble with the IRS." The pieces started falling into place. Harold's sudden interest in my financial situation. His detailed questions about my income and savings. The carefully calculated amount of $25,000, which would be just enough to cover his back taxes and penalties if he had been hiding substantial income. "Janet, I think my father is trying to use me to solve his tax problems." That's exactly what I think too. And if that's the case, we need to be very careful about how we handle this. Your father might be more desperate than you realize. 3 days before our court date, I received an unexpected call from Doris. She sounded nervous, almost frightened. Beverly, your father wants to settle out of court. He says if you pay $15,000, he'll drop the lawsuit. Mom, I don't owe him any money. We're going to court to prove that. Please, honey, just pay him. I'm scared of what will happen if this goes to trial. Scared of what? But she had already hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Doris's frightened voice, about Stanley's casual acceptance of the family's financial schemes, about Harold's cold calculation in targeting me for money I didn't owe. I was about to find out just how deep this rabbit hole went. The morning of our court date, I arrived at the Denver County Courthouse 45 minutes early. My attorney Janet had prepared me for what to expect, but nothing could have prepared me for the emotional impact of seeing my family across the courtroom. Huddled with their lawyer like I was a stranger, they were suing for damages. Harold wore his best suit, the navy one he saved for funerals and important occasions. He looked confident, almost smug, occasionally glancing in my direction, with the cold stare of someone who believed he held all the cards. Doris sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, eyes downcast, refusing to meet my gaze. Stanley was there too, lounging in his chair like he was attending a movie rather than a legal proceeding that could destroy what remained of our family. He wore jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt, clearly not taking the proceedings seriously. Harold's attorney, a thin man in an expensive suit, had arranged several file folders on the table in front of him. The folders were thick, suggesting they had compiled substantial documentation to support their case. When the bailiff called our case, Judge Patricia Coleman, a stern woman in her 60s, took her seat and reviewed the file briefly before addressing both parties. "This is an unusual case," she began. "Mr. Morrison, you're seeking $25,000 in what you claim are outstanding family debts from your daughter. Please present your evidence." Harold's attorney stood and began his presentation with confidence. "Your Honor, the defendant lived in my client's home for 4 years as an adult from age 18 to 22. During this time, she contributed only partial payment for her room and board, leaving a substantial balance unpaid." He produced a ledger handwritten in Harold's distinctive writing, showing monthly charges of $500 for room and board, with my $300 payments noted as partial payments, leaving a monthly balance of $200 plus accumulating interest. "Furthermore," the attorney continued, "my client provided substantial assistance with the defendant's college education co-signing loans and providing direct financial support totaling $7,500. This was when he produced what looked like a promissory note dated 4 years ago with what appeared to be my signature at the bottom. The note stated that I had borrowed $7,500 from Harold for educational expenses and agreed to repay the amount with interest within 5 years of graduation. I felt my chest tighten as I stared at that document. The signature looked like mine, but I had never signed any such agreement. I had never borrowed money from Harold for school. Janet immediately objected. "Your Honor, we dispute the authenticity of that document and request a handwriting analysis." Judge Coleman noted the objection and asked Harold's attorney to continue. The attorney presented bank statements showing Harold's payments on my student loans during my junior and senior years. "As you can see, Your Honor, my client made substantial payments on loans for which he was a co-signer, expecting reimbursement that never came." This was partially true. Harold had been a co-signer on my student loans, but the payments shown were required monthly payments that he made only when I was temporarily unemployed for 6 weeks during my senior year. I had reimbursed him for those payments plus interest within 3 months. When it was our turn to present evidence, Janet methodically dismantled their case. She produced my bank records showing consistent monthly payments to Harold throughout my time living at home. She showed my complete student aid file demonstrating that I had managed my own college financing through a combination of grants, scholarships, and loans. "Your Honor," Janet said, The plaintiff's own statements to neighbors and family members contradict his current claims. We have witness statements from 3 people who heard Mr. Morrison boast about how his daughter's education didn't cost him a dime. She produced email screenshots where Harold had praised my financial independence to relatives, specifically mentioning that I had paid my own way through college. But then Harold's attorney played what he thought was his trump card. He presented additional documentation that made my blood run cold. Bank statements showing large cash deposits into Harold's personal account with notations like Beverly loan repayment and family debt collection. Your Honor, these deposits show that the defendant has been making sporadic payments on her debt acknowledgement that the debt exists. I stared at those bank statements in confusion. The deposits were real, but they weren't from me. I had never made any payments beyond my monthly room and board during the time I lived at home. Janet leaned over and whispered, "Do you know what these deposits are?" I shook my head, but something about the amounts nagged at me. Then it hit me. Those amounts corresponded exactly to cash payments I had seen Stanley make to Harold over the years. Money that Stanley claimed was from odd jobs and temporary work. Your Honor, I said, standing up before Janet could stop me, those deposits aren't from me. I think they're from my brother Stanley, and I think my father has been misrepresenting their source. Harold's face flushed red. That's ridiculous. Beverly is trying to drag her brother into this to avoid paying her debts. But Judge Coleman looked intrigued. Mr. Morrison, can you explain the source of these deposits more specifically? Harold's attorney shuffled through his papers, clearly not prepared for this line of questioning. Your Honor, my client has stated these are loan repayments from his daughter. But why are they cash deposits rather than checks or transfers? The judge asked. And why are they irregular amounts and timing if they're supposed to be payments on a structured debt? I could see Harold getting increasingly agitated. His confident demeanor was cracking, and he kept whispering urgently to his attorney. Judge Coleman studied the documents more carefully. Mr. Morrison, these bank records raise some questions about your family's financial activities. Some of these cash deposits are quite substantial. Are you reporting all of your income to the IRS? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Harold's face went pale, and his attorney looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Your Honor, my client's tax filings are not relevant to this debt collection case, the attorney said quickly. But Judge Coleman wasn't satisfied. Actually, they might be very relevant. If Mr. Morrison has been misrepresenting the source of these deposits to his bank, and if these deposits represent unreported income, then this court needs to ensure we're not being used to legitimize fraudulent financial activities. She turned to her clerk. Please contact the IRS fraud hotline. I want someone from their office to review these financial records before we proceed. Harold jumped to his feet. Your Honor, that's completely unnecessary. This is a simple family debt collection case. Sit down, Mr. Morrison, Judge Coleman said sternly. Nothing about this case is simple. We're going to take a 30-minute recess while the IRS reviews these documents. As court recessed, I saw Harold frantically whispering to his attorney while Doris looked like she might faint. Stanley, for the first time all day, looked worried. I had no idea that the next 30 minutes would change everything I thought I knew about my family. When court reconvened, 2 IRS agents entered the courtroom carrying a thick file folder. Agent Maria Santos, a serious woman in her 40s, and Agent David Chen, a younger man with wire-rimmed glasses, took seats at a table the judge had arranged for them. Agent Santos stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. After reviewing the financial documents presented in this case, we have some concerns we'd like to address. Judge Coleman nodded. Please proceed, Agent Santos. Mr. Morrison, according to your tax filings for the past 5 years, you've reported an annual income of approximately $32,000 from your auto repair business. However, the bank deposits we've reviewed today suggest you've been handling significantly more cash than your reported income would indicate. Harold's attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, this is outside the scope of the current proceedings. But Agent Santos continued. We've also discovered that Mr. Morrison has been operating under multiple business names without proper licensing or tax registration. Stanley's Auto Repair, Morrison's Mobile Mechanics, and Denver Quick Fix are all unregistered entities that appear to be funneling cash payments into Mr. Morrison's personal accounts. The courtroom was dead silent. I watched Harold's confident expression crumble as the full scope of his financial deception was laid bare. Agent Chen stood and added, Additionally, our investigation revealed that Mr. Morrison has been operating an unlicensed lending business providing high-interest loans to members of his community. The cash deposits in question appear to be payments from borrowers not from his daughter as claimed in this lawsuit. Harold shot to his feet. This is outrageous. You have no right to dig into my private business dealings. Judge Coleman's voice cut through his protest like ice. Mr. Morrison, you brought financial documents into my courtroom as evidence. That makes them subject to scrutiny. Sit down. Agent Santos opened her file folder and pulled out several documents. Mr. Morrison, according to our calculations, you failed to report approximately $150,000 in income over the past 5 years. You've also been charging interest rates of up to 25% on unlicensed loans, which violates Colorado lending laws. The math was staggering. Harold owed the IRS approximately $42,000 in back taxes, plus penalties and interest. The amount he was demanding from me in this lawsuit was suspiciously close to what he needed to settle his tax debt. But Agent Chen wasn't finished. We've also discovered that Mr. Morrison opened a business checking account using his daughter's Social Security number without her knowledge or consent. This account was used to deposit unreported income, presumably to make it appear as though the money belonged to his daughter, rather than to his unlicensed businesses. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Harold had stolen my identity to hide his illegal income. The man who raised me, who taught me about honesty and responsibility, had been using my name to commit federal crimes. Doris made a small choking sound from across the courtroom. This was clearly the first time she was hearing about the extent of Harold's deception. Judge Coleman addressed Harold directly. Mr. Morrison, these are serious allegations. Do you have any explanation for these discrepancies? Harold's attorney was shuffling papers frantically, clearly trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. Harold himself sat frozen, his face ashen. Your Honor. Harold finally said, his voice barely audible. I may have made some bookkeeping errors, but my daughter still owes me the money I'm claiming. Agent Santos looked at him with obvious disdain. Mr. Morrison, bookkeeping errors don't explain opening fraudulent accounts using someone else's Social Security number. They don't explain operating multiple unlicensed businesses, and they certainly don't explain the systematic underreporting of income to evade federal taxes. Judge Coleman had heard enough. Mr. Morrison, this court finds no credible evidence that your daughter owes you any money. The documents you've presented appear to be either fabricated or misrepresented. Furthermore, this lawsuit appears to be an attempt to legitimize funds obtained through potentially illegal activities. She turned to the IRS agents. Agents Santos and Chen, I'm dismissing this case and referring all financial evidence to your office for further investigation. Then she addressed Harold's attorney. Counselor, I suggest you advise your client to seek separate representation for the federal charges he's likely to face. Harold slumped in his chair as the reality of his situation hit him. He wasn't just losing the lawsuit he had no legal basis for in the first place. He was facing federal charges for tax evasion, identity theft, and operating unlicensed businesses. Stanley looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I realized he had probably been involved in Harold's illegal lending operation, possibly collecting payments and intimidating borrowers who fell behind. Doris was quietly crying, finally understanding that her husband had been lying to her for years about their financial situation and his business activities. As for me, I felt a mixture of vindication and devastation. I had been right that Harold's lawsuit was fraudulent, but discovering the extent of his criminal behavior was more painful than I had anticipated. Judge Coleman wasn't finished. Ms. Morrison, given the evidence of identity theft and fraudulent use of your personal information, I'm ordering Mr. Morrison to pay your attorney fees and court costs. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. The judge banged her gavel, and just like that, Harold's carefully constructed house of lies came crashing down. As we left the courthouse, Harold was immediately approached by Agent Santos, who informed him that he was under investigation for multiple federal crimes and should expect to be contacted by their office within 48 hours. His attorney abandoned him on the courthouse steps, citing a conflict of interest. I felt no satisfaction watching my father's world collapse. The vindication I had expected to feel was overwhelmed by sadness and disappointment. This was my family, these were the people who had raised me, and now I was watching them face the consequences of years of deception and illegal activity. But I also felt something else: determination. Harold had tried to make me a victim of his schemes, and I wasn't going to let that stand. Over the next several weeks, I took every legal action available to me to ensure that justice was served and that I was protected from any future attempts at manipulation or fraud. First, I filed a formal complaint with the police about the identity theft. The fraudulent bank account Harold had opened using my Social Security number had to be closed and removed from my credit history. This process took weeks of paperwork and documentation, but it was essential to protect my financial future. I also filed a civil lawsuit against Harold for damages related to the identity theft and the emotional distress caused by his fraudulent lawsuit against me. My attorney Janet recommended seeking punitive damages to send a clear message that this behavior would not be tolerated. The investigation into Harold's business activities revealed even more disturbing details. He had been operating his unlicensed lending business for over 3 years, targeting vulnerable members of our community who couldn't qualify for traditional bank loans. His interest rates were predatory, and he used intimidation tactics to collect payments. Stanley's role in the operation became clear during the investigation. He had been Harold's collector, visiting borrowers who fell behind on payments and pressuring them to pay up. Some of Stanley's victims filed complaints with the police describing threatening behavior and harassment. The IRS investigation moved quickly. Within 2 months, Harold was formally charged with tax evasion, operating unlicensed businesses, and identity theft. The total amount of his tax debt, including penalties and interest, came to $57,000. Doris filed for divorce within 3 weeks of the court hearing. She claimed she had no knowledge of Harold's illegal activities and wanted to protect herself from potential legal liability. The divorce proceedings revealed that Harold had hidden assets and income from her as well, leaving her financially vulnerable, despite 30 years of marriage. But perhaps the most satisfying development was the response from our extended family and community. When word spread about Harold's lawsuit against me and the subsequent revelations about his criminal behavior, the sympathy I had expected him to receive never materialized. Instead, family members who had been victims of Harold's manipulation over the years began sharing their own stories. Uncle Robert revealed that Harold had borrowed $5,000 from him 2 years ago and never repaid it, despite claiming the money was for emergency medical expenses. Cousin Linda described how Harold had tried to convince her to invest in one of his fake businesses, promising guaranteed returns that seemed too good to be true. The picture that emerged was of a man who had been systematically deceiving and exploiting everyone around him for years, using family relationships and community trust to further his schemes. Harold eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation with ongoing investigations into his lending network. He received 6 months in jail, followed by 2 years of probation, and was ordered to pay full restitution to the IRS and his lending victims. Stanley was charged as an accomplice and received probation plus community service. He was also required to testify against Harold's co-conspirators in the lending operation. The financial resolution came more slowly. Harold's assets, including the family home, were seized by the IRS to pay his tax debt. Doris was allowed to keep some personal belongings and a small retirement account that had been in her name only. As for me, I received a settlement of $3,000 from Harold to cover my attorney fees and costs related to repairing the damage from his identity theft. It wasn't much, and it felt like a symbolic victory. More importantly, I had learned to trust my instincts and stand up for myself even against family members who tried to manipulate and exploit me. 6 months after that devastating day in court, I found myself in a surprisingly good place. The trauma of discovering my father's criminal behavior and the family's systematic deception had been difficult to process, but it had also been liberating in ways I hadn't expected. The first few weeks after the trial were the hardest. I felt angry, betrayed, and confused about how I had missed the signs of Harold's illegal activities for so many years. I questioned my own judgment and wondered if I had been naive about other relationships in my life. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. Through our sessions, I began to understand that Harold's behavior wasn't a reflection of my failings as a daughter, but rather a pattern of manipulation and control that had been present throughout my childhood. Financial abuse is often overlooked, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our sessions. When it comes from family members, victims often blame themselves or make excuses for the abuser's behavior because they can't believe someone they love would deliberately harm them. Working with Dr. Martinez helped me recognize that Harold's treatment of me had been abusive long before the lawsuit. The constant questioning about my finances, the guilt trips about family loyalty, the double standards between Stanley and me, these were all tactics designed to maintain control and set me up as a potential source of money when he needed it. The therapy also helped me process my complicated feelings about Doris. While she hadn't been directly involved in Harold's schemes, her passive enabling and refusal to speak up when she saw unfair treatment had contributed to the toxic family dynamics. Surprisingly, Doris and I began rebuilding our relationship about 4 months after the trial. She reached out with a heartfelt apology acknowledging that she had failed to protect me from Harold's manipulation and expressing genuine remorse for her years of silence. "I was so afraid of confronting your father," she admitted during one of our coffee meetings. "I convinced myself that staying quiet was keeping the peace, but I see now that I was just enabling his behavior. Our relationship would never be the same as it had been, but we found a new foundation based on honesty and mutual respect." Doris moved into a small apartment across town and found a part-time job at a local bookstore. For the first time in decades, she was making her own decisions and managing her own finances. Stanley's recovery was more complicated. The criminal charges and community service were just the beginning of his journey toward taking responsibility for his actions. He eventually moved out of state, claiming he needed a fresh start away from the stigma of his involvement in Harold's schemes. I chose not to maintain contact with Stanley. While I hoped he would eventually get his life together, I had learned the importance of setting boundaries with family members who had proven themselves untrustworthy. My career flourished during this period of personal growth. The confidence I had gained from standing up to Harold's lawsuit translated into more assertiveness at work. I received a promotion to senior marketing coordinator and a salary increase that finally allowed me to start building substantial savings. More importantly, my relationship with my boyfriend Jake deepened significantly. He had stood by me throughout the legal drama, offering emotional support without trying to solve my problems for me. Watching me handle the crisis with strength and determination had given him a new level of respect for my character. "I've learned so much about setting boundaries from watching you," he told me one evening as we walked through downtown Denver. "You showed me what it looks like to love family members while still protecting yourself from their destructive behavior." The broader community response continued to be supportive. Several of Harold's lending victims thanked me for exposing his operation, explaining that they had felt trapped and didn't know how to seek help. My willingness to stand up to him had given them the courage to come forward with their own stories. One of the most meaningful conversations I had was with Mrs. Patterson, an elderly neighbor who had borrowed $3,000 from Harold when her husband needed medical treatment they couldn't afford. Harold had charged her 18% monthly interest, and when she fell behind on payments, Stanley had shown up at her door making threats. "I was so scared," she told me. "I didn't know who to turn to. When I heard about what happened in court, I finally felt like someone would listen to my story." Mrs. Patterson was one of 6 victims who filed complaints against Harold, and her testimony was instrumental in his conviction for illegal lending practices. The financial lessons I learned during this experience were invaluable. I opened new bank accounts at a different institution, set up credit monitoring to watch for any future identity theft attempts, and created a comprehensive filing system for all of my financial documents. I also started an emergency fund specifically designed to protect me from future attempts at financial manipulation by family members or anyone else. Having that safety net gave me peace of mind and the confidence to maintain my boundaries regardless of external pressure. But perhaps the most important lesson was about trust and family relationships. I learned that loving someone doesn't require accepting their abuse or enabling their destructive behavior. I learned that it's possible to forgive someone while still protecting yourself from future harm. Harold served his 6-month sentence and was released on probation. He sent me one letter from jail, a rambling attempt at an apology that mostly focused on justifying his actions and blaming his victims for being naive. I read it once and then threw it away. I have no plans to rebuild a relationship with Harold. The trust that was broken went too deep, and the deliberate nature of his deception was too calculated to forgive. He didn't make a mistake in a moment of desperation. He planned and executed a scheme to defraud me and others over a period of years. That doesn't mean I carry hatred or resentment toward him. I've simply accepted that some relationships are too damaged to repair, and that protecting myself requires maintaining distance from people who have proven themselves willing to harm me for personal gain. Today I live in a larger apartment in a better neighborhood. I have a healthy savings account, a job I enjoy, and relationships based on mutual respect and honesty. I've learned to trust my instincts about people and situations, and I'm no longer afraid to speak up when something doesn't feel right. The experience taught me that family loyalty should never come at the cost of your own well-being, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. Most importantly, I learned that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. I survived a deliberate attempt by my own father to financially and emotionally destroy me, and I came out of it with my integrity intact and my future brighter than ever. When people ask me how I found the courage to fight back against my own family in court, I tell them it wasn't courage at all. It was simply a refusal to be victimized by people who were counting on my love and loyalty to protect them from the consequences of their actions. Sometimes protecting yourself means disappointing people who claim to love you. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone against your own family. And sometimes the people who should protect you the most are the ones you most need protection from. The truth has a way of coming to light even when it's buried under years of lies and manipulation. In my case, it took an IRS investigation and a federal courtroom to reveal the full extent of my father's deception, but justice was eventually served. I hope my story encourages others who might be facing similar situations with manipulative family members to trust their instincts, seek help when they need it, and remember that they deserve to be treated with respect regardless of biology or shared history. What would you do if your own family tried to sue you for money you didn't owe? Have you ever had to set boundaries with relatives who tried to take advantage of your love and loyalty? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family drama and finding the strength to stand up for yourself. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might be dealing with similar challenges. Remember, you're stronger than you think, and you deserve relationships built on honesty and respect. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find the courage to protect yourself from anyone who tries to take advantage of your kindness, even if they happen to be family. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.